do in welcoming him, instead of giving a speech today, I'm going to use words that were used 200 years ago by a resident of town of Reading. And who might that resident be? Well, in my research, I found out there were only two folks that were written down as having to come here to the general. Just two names. One was a minister, Dr. William Wakefield, and he'd be a good one to call him, correct? Except that in research, I found out that William Wakefield was only 13 years old when he met the general, so he was out. The second one is a well-known character from town, Reverend Sanborn. Reverend Peter Sanborn, Reading minister, lived right over there off of Lowell Street. He was here, so what I'm going to do is give you an introduction that he and many like him throughout the entire East Coast gave to the general when he came to their town. Okay, thank you. 200 years ago, this is what might have been said here. On behalf of the citizens of Reading, we have the honor to present you their most respectful and cordial salutation. It is impossible to express the feelings excited by the presence of a hero who has done so much to secure the liberty and happiness of mankind. With joy and gratitude and affection, we hail the friend of Washington and the intrepid defender of American independence. This day shall long be remembered by the citizens of Reading. Our children's children will account it a high festival and keep it holy. For this day, we have been suffered to pour out the effusions and our gratitude to the friend of Washington, the benefactor of America, and the patriot of France. General, welcome to Reading.
Thank you, monsieur.
At this time, I'd like to do Pino De Rosio, Chairman of the Reading Historical Committee, with his greeting.
Thank you, Peter. General, welcome back. Glad to welcome you back 200 years after. I'd just like to give some quick thank yous first to Peter McGuire and to Alan Hoffman of the American Friends of Lafayette in America, who sponsored this event and also is responsible for our sign from 2 years ago. Thanks everyone for coming. It's great to see a good crowd. It's great that it's 200 years to the day from the initial visit. Unfortunately, Student Hotel and Tavern is no longer here, but we do have a nice beautiful building that still looks kind of the same as it did 100 years ago. It's more than electrical boxes and area. But again, just thank you, General, for coming. I'd also like to thank Virginia Adams from the Historical Commission for being our liaison and tireless advocate for all things Reading history. And we have some other speakers, so I'll keep this brief. Sorry, my hat doesn't fit anymore. But enjoy the day and hope to see. Maybe some of you kids will be back for the 300 year. But thanks again, General. Welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Monsieur. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'd like to present Mr. Alan Hoffman, President of the American Friends of Lafayette, whose diligence has kept us going in putting all this together. Alan, welcome to Reading.
Thank you, Peter. What a nice crowd to welcome the General back after 200 years. The American Friends of Lafayette has been conducting events like this to commemorate the bicentennial since August of last year. We've conducted about 150 events in various places. We have 30 events over the next 10 days in 4 states, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, and then Vermont, because the General did those 4 states and had events 200 years ago. Now, the farewell tour, which is a little known thing in the American history books, is an incredible event. One contemporary, Edward Everett, the town of Everett, was a casino town, as they call. He called it the farewell tour an event unparalleled in the history of man. So here is this 67-year-old man, incredible energy, traveled all 24 states for 13 months and was greeted like a conquering hero in those states. Now when he was in Boston in 1824, the Bunker Hill Monument Association said, will you come back next year and help lay the cornerstone of the monument? So he said, if I'm still in the country, and he was still in the country, and he did. So just 3 or 4 days ago, he helped lay the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument. So he left Boston on the 21st at 9 a.m. And the best account that I have, I think Peter has word for this, is in a New Hampshire newspaper called The Statesman. And it says he started from Boston June 21st at 9 a.m. Passed through Charlestown and Medford to Reading. Now he didn't stop at Charlestown and Medford because he had spent time in both places before. In the first 2 mentioned towns, the people whom he met, without exception, respectfully saluted him, and many were drawn to the windows by his approach. At Skinner's Hotel in Reading, a large number of persons crowded in to see him and were received with great affability. The landlord refused any remuneration for the refreshments he supplied him and his attendants. At Barnard's Hotel, which is now in Northland, a considerable number of people of both sexes and all ages drawn up in regular order to hear his approach. Congratulations before he headed north. As a result of during the farewell tour, there was a whole consumer craze. All kinds of objects were created around Lafayette's visit. This is, for example, a ribbon that was worn by the school children of Boston in 1824 when he arrived at the Boston Common. He was greeted by over 3 million people. His name became a household name, and therefore we have 80 cities, counties, towns, numerous streets, monuments, mountain, a river, and a lake named for Lafayette. Again, thank you very much for coming, and I think at this point, Peter, Lafayette was
No, I have a few more words. Few more words. One thing that, if it wasn't for Alan, this marker would not be here. The Lafayette Trails Incorporated require original sources to prove that Lafayette has come to these places. We had nothing. Everybody knew Lafayette came here, but we had everybody in town searching, and we found nothing. But Alan came to the rescue and found that article from the New Hampshire newspaper, published 4 days after he came here. And Lafayette Trail said, okay. So, thank you. Where are you, Alan? Thank you, Alan. Okay, very quickly, why this is so important to Reading, that I'm looking around, and some of you might have relationships that go back 50 years. Well, there is a person in Reading that has a 50-year relationship with the general. His name was John Brooks. He was Reading's first town doctor. He was in town here. And I'm going to tell you about this relationship very, very quickly. And this all has to do with the start of our revolution, Lexington and Concord. Go back to that April night. Everybody knew in New England and the colonies something was going on. Revolution was in the air. The crown was very, very upset. We've got to do something. Their plan was to go out to the different towns and gather up all the stores of gunpowder and ammunition. Well, they tried it first over in Salem, and it didn't work. The townspeople sent back the regulars. General Gage said it's not going to happen again. And on that April night, one of by land, two of by sea, they were coming to get the stores of ammunition from Concord and also to arrest John Hancock and Samuel Adams. Well, Medford that night, he's there. Martin Harris is a rider, he's an express rider. In other words, these are the ones that were going to give the alarm. He's in Medford. He meets Paul Revere. The word is out. Martin takes off, comes to Stoneham, comes to Reading. These two people. I have to see John Brooks. He's the doctor. Why, are you ill or something? Well, no. He was also commander of the Reading Minutemen. Went over to his house, right down the back here, John Street, 4 houses in. You'll see a plaque, John Damon House. That's where he, quote, took a room when he first came to this town. Brooks isn't there. They say he's up on, which is now Haverhill Street, at the Harshons, at seeing a sick patient. Well, many people say, no, he was with a group of Minutemen. Went up there, gave the word. Brooks got on his horse, went up to the parish, the next parish, North Reading. Stand by your arms. Came down, got the Minutemen. Dawn went off to Concord, went off to history. Reverend Edward Foster from town here was with Brooks at Concord. The Reading militia were the first ones to fire on the regulars coming out of Concord. Brooks said to Foster, I have never been so frightened in all my life. Success. Move on. We're in the vote. Brooks works his way up. Colonel. Battle of Saratoga, upstate New York. The British. We have a plan. We're going to separate New England from the rest of the colonies. Take New England. Worry about them later. Army comes down under the Burgoyne in Saratoga. Colonel Brooks is there with his men. Brooks leads a charge against the Hessians. Success. We win. An army of doctors, sailors, cooks, farmers, lawyers defeated the toughest army in Europe at the time. Word gets back to your country, general. What is going on over there? How can they win? It is time for us to come over and assist. I took the call and came over. General Brooks went off to glory, and he received an order from George Washington. I understand you have great military capability. I want you to go down to a small village in Pennsylvania and meet up with some Europeans who will come over to help us. The small town was Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. One of the gentlemen who came over, you generals, you met John Brooks, and you worked together during that horrid winter, and after that parted. You worked for us, you helped us. Colonel Brooks went off to help us. 50 years later, 50, you being the last living general of the entire Revolutionary War on both sides, election for President Monroe come back to the country that loves you. In August, you come into Boston. Thousands greet you. You go into the State House. There on the second floor of the State House in Durham Hall, you look and you see your old friend, Captain Colonel Governor John Brooks. And according to your secretary, Auguste Lafayette, you two hug graciously, meeting a 50-year meeting. But, General, I have said to tell you, since last August when you were here, Governor Brooks has passed. I'm sorry he's not here to see you. He is important to have said on his deathbed, I have received my orders and am ready to march on. You're a good friend. You're a good friend of 50 years, and I hope we can all have lasting friendships like that will last more than 50 years. Thank you, General, for all you've done.
Merci, mes amis. My name is Marie-Joseph Paul-Ivroch Gilbert Dumotier de Lafayette. You may call me General for short. And it is indeed my pleasure to be once again among the patriotic citizens of Massachusetts and here in the town of Reading, where I have been welcomed so warmly and so affectionately by you and by you, monsieur. And I thank you for your reminiscences of past times and for your kind words upon the life of my friend, Dr. Brooks. My obligations to the United States far outweigh any merit that I might plausibly claim. They date from the time when I had the good fortune to be adopted as a young soldier, a favored son of your country. They have been continued to me over many decades of affections and confidence. And now, thanks to the most gracious invitation of your president, Monsieur Monroe, who himself was a friend of mine from our days in the army of General Washington together, I have been greeted by a series of welcomes, any one of which would be more than enough to compensate for all of the exertions of a lifetime of service. In these towns, I have grasped the hands and looked once again into the eyes of other soldiers, alongside whom I fought during our conflict for independence, and been reminded with vivacity of those times when we shared the same dangers and fatigues. I cannot help but be reminded as well, as I see the faces of the young people in the crowd, of how it came to be that I learned of the American struggle for independence in the first place. For it was when I was a much younger man, in the summer of 1775, in the city of Metz in eastern France, when I was detached with my unit of the French cavalry, we received a very peculiar guest in our encampment. His Royal Highness the Duke of Gloucester was the very brother of King George of England, traveling from London to Italy and stopping along the way in France. My commander, the Duc de Broglie, wished to put French hospitality on display, and so all of the highest ranking officers were invited to dine with the Duke, as well as all of those officers who carry titles of nobility. And you will hear me sometimes referred to as the Marquis de Lafayette, and I ask the young people in this gracious audience here, you who have had the good sense to abolish hereditary titles of nobility, do you know what it is, a Marquis? No. Well, you have heard perhaps of a king and a queen, yes? And then you will not be surprised to have heard of a prince and a princess. Perhaps you have heard of a duke and a duchess. And perhaps you may even have heard of a count and a countess and a baron and a baroness. Well, these are titles. These are essentially the jobs that are passed down from family to family. In France, the Marquis is between a count and a duke. And so I was born not a Marquis de Lafayette. My father was the Marquis before I was. He died before my second birthday at the Battle of Minden during the 7 Years' War, which was fought on this continent as well, although you Americans insist upon calling it the French and Indian War, as though those were the only parties involved. No, 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 no. He was certainly not killed by the French. He was killed by the English in Prussia. This was a war that remained very fresh in the minds of the officers who fought in this conflict. And among those officers was my commander-in-chief, who wished to put all of his troops in very regular order because he believed the war would re-erupt along the old lines. But for a young man like myself, I was 17 years old, very far from my home in Paris, from my family in Auvergne. It was excruciatingly boring. But when the Duke of Gloucester arrived, he shared with us that evening news of events that were unfolding here in the New World, where a group of Bostonians had taken up arms against the King's Own soldiers in the towns of Concord and Lexington. This news had only just arrived in the capitals of Europe, as well as the news that a Americans meeting in Philadelphia had selected a gentleman from the Southern Territory of Virginia, George Washington, to lead a continental American army. And at the sound of these stories, to hear of these brave men and women, these farmers, these doctors, taking up arms against the King's Own soldiers, my own heart was enlisted. From the moment I heard America's name pronounced, I knew that I loved her. And when I learned that she was fighting for her freedom, I too wished to shed my blood for her. The days I spent fighting for her I shall count among the happiest of my entire life. But when I arrived in Philadelphia, 2 years later, waving my letters from Dr. Franklin in the face of the Congress, Congress did not know what to do with me. Who is this young Frenchman who claims to be a marquis? I had traveled overland from South Carolina. I must have looked a fright. When I was at last allowed to present my own words before the Congress, I stood before them as I stand before you. And with my limited English at the time, I said that after all of the journey that I had made, I earned the right, I believe, only to two favors. The first is to serve your cause in any capacity you would have me, and the second is to do so at my own expense as a volunteer. And upon hearing that they would not be required to pay me, Congress was suddenly very interested in me. They were at this time completely preoccupied with money. I hope that it is different in your time. But even then, they made me a major general, but it was to be a decorative rank, an honorary commission. I was to have no troops under my command, no responsibilities. I am not so insensitive to know that their treatment of me may have had something to do with my perceived influence at the court of Versailles. I began to wonder why it was I had come all this way. I did not have to wait long for an answer, because I was shortly invited to dine with members of Congress at the City Tavern in Philadelphia, where the guest of honor would be none other than General George Washington himself, and everyone was distracted by his presence. It seemed to draw the very air from the chamber, and there I sat at one end of a very long table. The general sat looking at me. He must have considered me some sort of young puppy dog who had wandered in off the street. I must have looked to him no older than you must have. But if these were his thoughts, he did not give voice to them. Instead, after the dinner was completed, he spoke to me very kindly. He complimented me on the service and sacrifice that I had made in support of the American cause, and told me it would please him if I called the quarters of the commander-in-chief my home, and considered myself a part of his family. And this word struck out to me like a sort of bolt, you see, because in French the word famille is very similar, but it refers only to relatives of the blood, you see. I learned shortly thereafter that His Excellency was referring, in fact, to his military family, the officers under his command who shared his headquarters: Captain Hamilton, Captain Lawrence, Captain, now President Monroe. But for a moment, I believed it was His Excellency's intention to adopt me as his son right there in the City Tavern. I knew he had no sons of his own. I had never known my own father, and so as a young lad of 19, what choice did I have? I readily accepted. In time, I began to understand exactly what he meant. I began to understand America's quest for liberty within the very fiber of my being. And indeed, many of the men alongside whom I fought during this conflict I consider to be as much a family as I have ever known. Foremost among them, my paternal friend, General Washington. Mes amis, the approbation of the American people for my conduct during our fight for independence and during the vicissitudes of the European revolutions which followed are for me the highest honor that I could ever hope to achieve. Well may I stand firm and proud when in their names, in your names, I can be said to have remained ever faithful to those American principles of liberty, equality, true social order, the devotion to which, as it has been since my earliest youth, so it shall continue to be into my latest breath, and I aspire at all times to follow the example of the American education it has been my honor to receive. Mesdames et messieurs, je vous souhaite tous et toutes une très agréable continuation de votre journée. I wish you all a very pleasant continuation of your day, and thank you from the bottom of this old soldier's heart for the warm and hospitable greeting that you have offered me. Merci aux citoyens de Reading, merci aux citoyens de Massachusetts, vive l'Amérique, vive la liberté. Thank you. Thank you, mes amis.
One other thing, I wish to thank the Latham family. Without the Latham family, we would not be here today. Thank you very, very much.
I have to bring Lafayette to Andover, but I'll get the car and I'll pull up just around the corner. So if you'd like to get photos with him or ask him questions, now would be the time. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great.
Alright everybody, thank you for watching. We'll be doing Juneteenth later on today. It'll be 4 o'clock.